Spoiler alert for the following programs. I will be discussing these throughout the episode at multiple different times, so if you don't want spoilers, I would wait to watch this until you've seen everything. Or unless someone watches it for you and tells you what parts you can watch. There's always that. Hello to people from Part 1! If you're not here from Part 1, welcome to Part 2. There's a Part 1, by the way. Here we go. Part 2. Types of OTPs and love triangles. You'll see a lot of stuff on the internet about OTPs, or one-true pairings, and how they're categorized into different things based off this, that, and the other. Here's my list of categories. First, you have childhood friends. Whether they've stayed in contact or are only recently reunited, these two normally have a very detailed history together. While it can be only knew each other for a summer, typically you'll see a lot of tension when they know each other or knew each other very well. Sometimes they're broken up and embittered, and other times they couldn't be any closer and they're starting to be more than friends. Either way, it's difficult to ignore the connection they'll have and the potential subplots that can come from it. Second is high school sweethearts. They can either be current or former. Not a lot of high school sweethearts work out in real life, but some do, so it's always a fun time to write those. Movies like To All the Boys I've Loved Before, The Kissing Booth, She's the Man, all teenagers that, as far as the movies show, become basically soulmates. Again, not necessarily realistic, but appealing. Not to mention how cute the dynamics can be, although these are some of the ones that can become extremely petty, so, beware. Next up is something I like to call coincidence couples. They can also be called fate pairings, or whatever TV tropes calls them, but these types of couples come together through whatever circumstances, crazy or normal, come their way. Majority of the time they won't know each other prior, and how they meet and continue interacting typically has more to do with the main overarching plot rather than the romance itself. But there's also a lot of love at first sight. Most of the Hallmark movie romances are like this, where a chance meeting leads to wacky hijinks with romantic subplots. Some of my favorites include the Princess Swap movies, the Christmas Prince movies, 9 Lives of Christmas, Why Are There So Many Christmas Ones? Whatever type of movie they are, they also show up as subplots in a lot of TV shows or movies amidst most of the other chaos going on around them. One of my favorites, badasses in love. What the actual characters are like can vary, but typically it'll be some sort of opposites attract relationship. Maybe one is tougher and more of an obvious badass, while the other is sweet and more secretly a badass. Maybe we already know they're both badasses and they're just two characters who are protective of each other and adorable. Maybe they've been partners in battle for a long time and have a natural chemistry. There is normally some kind of foil aspect to it, but the two halves of this romance can also be frightfully similar. Just depends on how they're introduced and how they interact during both plot time and downtime. And the last one, longtime lovers. Typically showing up later in a story, these are couples who have been through a lot together, whether that's relationship drama or plot drama. If they start out in their relationship, they are likely supporting cast members, like Natasha and Spinnerella in the newer She-Ra. But they can always be your main cast. The reason main character romances pretty much never start out as a romance is because it's an easy subplot, and it gives the writer something to play with other than the main plot without having to write any evil twins or high school rivals. Not to mention all the potential character development you can get through a relationship. This doesn't mean characters can't start out together, it just isn't typical, especially in a series. With characters who are in a long-term relationship, regardless of character roles, they will have a long history together, and they will know a lot about each other and have a well-established dynamic. Unless something shakes that dynamic, like a new character or a lack thereof, it will remain largely stable. Another reason already established relationships are not common among main characters. Now for some OTP pairings. You'll notice a lot of these tend to overlap in several areas, but I'm trying to stay broad and mainly talk about them as if they are the primary, surface-level traits. I'll go into some of the potential deeper aspects and the flipped variations of these stereotypes, but for now, let's talk just pairings. One I see a lot is loner plus popular. Opposites attract, and it's amazing what you find out about a person once you get to know them. These typically have to do with the popular one showing the loner one that they're not what they think they are, like not a jerk, and the loner showing the popular one what it's like to not be popular. revealing bullies, showing another side of the high school experience, if they're in high school, etc. Sometimes it's also the popular one being one of the few people who actually notices the loner, who doesn't really get the hype but warms up to them eventually. These can show up in other dynamics, like a celebrity and a normal person, but they typically show up in high school romances due to the dynamics of a movie school, which are honestly a lot like real schools on crack for the purposes of entertainment. Although there could just be schools who randomly break out in a song and dance. I wouldn't know, mine never did. Either way, these can be very interesting to watch unfold as A and B find out the accuracy of their assumptions and the real dynamics on each end of the popularity spectrum, whatever the source of the popularity is. Another one is the nerd and the jock. Sort of building off the previous one, this is another one that typically boils down to opposites attract. The nerd and the jock can come together in a lot of ways. The jock may be struggling with their grades, and the nerd offers to help, or makes some kind of a deal in exchange for their help with something else. The nerd may have some alternate agenda involving the jock, whether with their knowledge or not, and they end up getting along pretty well and getting to know each other better than originally anticipated. Next up is ex-bad or shady and living sunshine. Whether they're reformed because of the living sunshine or it was unrelated and they're just a thing now, typically the ex-bad or shady side of this pairing will be more defensive and standoffish around most of the other cast members. Maybe the living sunshine is the only one they're gentle with, or the only one who can make them really laugh or smile. At least until some more found family members come in, because you know they will if there's more than just 2 members of the main cast. One thing about this dynamic is how the characters help each other evolve, with the living sunshine in all likelihood making the ex-bad more empathetic towards others, or less defensive and hostile, and the shady one may be teaching Sunshine some self-defense tactics. This dynamic can also hide the super fun Sunshine is terrifying and Shady is the least of your worries pairing, which is not strictly romantic and a lot of fun to write. Next is Playboy and Purity. I find these very satisfying most of the time. Typically going to be some I didn't know what true love really felt like arc for the Playboy, and the pure one is basically a gift to mankind who's about to whip this man into shape. And yes, it is typically a man. This can also relate to the nerd and the jock, with the nerd and the jock being in either position in the relationship. Next is pessimist and optimist. Essentially, one half is complaining about how hot it is and it's so busy at the park, while the other is just happy the sun is out. One side helps the other see the brighter side of life, while the other maybe gets them to see the more realist side of things. Neither of these characters have to completely change for the dynamic to work out, especially since it's so general, but their perspectives should shift from black and white to more shades of gray. Yes, I said that. Last one I'm going to talk about is rich or high class plus middle or low class. The lower class individual will likely be more likable and realistic, while the higher class individual is normally more selfish, self-centered, or generally carefree. It can also be flipped, where the higher class individual is really nice and actually really cares about other people, but normally the lower or middle class individual stays about the same. They will also likely be more hardworking and practical, which will often be in contrast with the rich or high class person. This is typically one of those plots about exploring the two sides of society, a lot of times with a grass is always greener theme by the end. This has to do with something that I learned in school, where depending on how you were raised and how much money you had growing up, you look at things differently. So while a middle class person might be more careful about their spending, a higher class person would be more like, just buy it because we can afford it. Or they're used to being able to afford it. Like I said near the beginning of this section, there can be a lot of overlap with these pairings, and these are just the ones I listed. A lot of the ones I said just now can actually be applied to a romance that isn't perfect, but I quite like. Mandy and Graham in the movie Prom, Pact. On the surface, Mandy is very much the nerd, and Graham is very much the jock. Mandy is also decidedly a loner, while Graham is probably one of the most popular kids in their school. But one of their other pairing types is flipped. You'd think the nerd would be pure, but Mandy is initially more self-centered and oriented on her future and what she needs to get what she wants rather than potential consequences for others. Like when she wants to get close to Graham just to get an in with his dad, a graduate from Harvard, the school she wants to go to. And Graham does have some stereotypical surface-level playboy-like traits, but he's really just trying to get by with all the pressure and expectations surrounding him thanks to his dad and being a star basketball player at his high school. He's a bit of a cinnamon roll, and he's genuinely hurt when he finds out why Mandy initially became friends with him and unintentionally ended up in a relationship with him. Now, these characters both develop through the movie, and while it isn't necessarily perfect, their relationship does get better. And in my opinion, they're one of the better examples of this part of OTP pairings. They're never going to be cut and dry. They're more of a building block or foundation for writing a relationship, like most tropes are, and they can normally be quite broad and could apply to many different dynamics. So don't feel like you're stuck in a box if you start out with any of these pairings in order to write a relationship. With any of these pairings and any romance in general, one of the biggest things to remember is how the characters build off each other, especially when they are opposites, like most of the pairings I listed earlier. Making each other better people, helping each other understand two sides of the society they live in, helping control each other's powers if that's a thing, the list goes on. The point is, if you assign them a specific role and character trait that is made obvious and given a lot of attention, it should develop with the character and, one way or another, contribute to the relationship. Kinda one of those everything should be intentional moments. Don't introduce character A as a jock and character B as a nerd and then let it have nothing to do with their actual romance. Or nothing to do with their actual relationship. It's a bit of a first impression thing, but for the audience and regarding the plot instead of do I wish to interact with you in the future. For Mandy and Graham, they had preconceptions about each other, which were later proven wrong, opening the front door for character development and development of a relationship. Not to mention it allows you to show your characters off a little more. Besides one true pairings, there's another big trope that comes with the romance genre. Love triangles. In case you can't already tell by my super hyped tone of voice, I don't like this one. Normally a love triangle is meant to cause tension between character A and character B, with character C either being an innocent bystander or actually kind of a jerk or some form of antagonist. It's supposed to reinforce their love for one another and bring in some subplots, but in my experience, it's just unnecessary, kinda dumb, and overused. One problem with this trope, probably the one that stands out the most to me, can come when you don't really like the people in the love triangle. Whether you just don't like one of the characters as, a character, or you just don't like the relationship between two characters, it can be really hard to keep going through a series if the love triangle is so painful that it feels like it's suffocating the rest of the plot, whatever it may be. I have this dragging myself through it problem with series like True Beauty, which is pretty good otherwise, and To All the Boys I've Loved Before, more specifically the second movie. And while those are primarily romance plots, fantasy and action-adventure are not safe from this either. It just really sucks when you're watching a show for the dragons and the super spies and a love triangle makes you want to stop and scream into a pillow. But not liking the characters isn't the only problem. There's actually a certain danger in writing a love triangle that not everyone thinks about. Accidentally making A and C's relationship better than A and B. A combination of these two problems happened in The Kissing Booth 2. Elle's relationship with Marco is a classic, dance partners turned lovers. But in the end, she goes back to Noah after 1, kissing Marco after winning a dance competition with him, and 2, dramatically professing her love for Noah when, by all accounts, her relationship with Marco was much more compelling, and Noah was probably better off without Elle anyway. Safe to say she's not my favorite. I'll try not to go on too much of a tangent, but if this movie had been its own thing, not a sequel, and ended with Elle getting together with Marco and Noah moving on, maybe even making him a jealous ex, I don't know, I think I would have liked it way better. At least in terms of the leading romance. The characters' personalities were still a little meh. I apologize to anyone who actually likes the Kissing Booth movies, but at the same time, I have no shame. If you really want to see a good Kissing Booth scene, you should watch She's the Man. I love the movie. Anyways, this is just one type of love triangle. There are a lot of directions they can go, only some of which I personally would enjoy, but hey, whatever floats your boat. My personal favorite is when A and B are in love, but C stands in the way somehow, either because of social classes, a loveless marriage, or even just an old partner. Then you're not dealing with the will they won't they as much as another antagonist, which for me is much more compelling. I like my drama, okay? Other triangles, most of which I dislike, include the classic A likes B and C but doesn't know who to pick, A likes B, B likes C, and C likes A and B are going to end up together but C likes A and tries to get with them anyway, which can create dramatic irony, and that one that happens in superhero stories where A likes B and B likes C, and A and C are the same person. Hope I haven't lost you yet. Honestly, that last one is pretty fun sometimes, but can also be incredibly painful, especially if it's dragged out endlessly. Looking at you, Superman, Miraculous Ladybug, Batman sometimes. I I said a couple already, and most of this part has just been me complaining, but my main issues with love triangles pretty much sum up to the fact that they're so petty and unnecessary. The drama of having to choose between two people is just too much most of the time, especially when they bring jealousy into the mix, when that doesn't even seem to fit into the original characterization at all. I really hate when the love triangle shoves the rest of the plot aside and I'm supposed to care about it. Like, I like romance, but not that kind. Especially not interrupting my fantasy realms and wizards and warlocks. I want to be all happy about them being cute and worrying about each other, okay? Don't give me that jealousy and choosing crap. Okay, now that that part is done, stay tuned for part 3, getting the characters together, writing the actual relationship, and my final thoughts on this genre.